I never finish a cup of tea. I always get to like here and there's still just like cold ass tea in it. I don't get it. It's every single drink I drink, I only ever drink like 2/3 of it. Even if I love the drink, I don't know what it is. Welcome to Pottery 101. My name is Lily. I am a ceramicist here in sunny London. It's not sunny today, it's very cloudy. Today's episode of Pottery 101, we're going to be talking about glazing. I'm not going to be talking about making glaze. I'm not going to be talking about what glaze is. I'm just going to be talking about glaze application. So if you want to know about recipes or sort of like what makes a glaze up, then you can head over to this video wherever it appears, and then come back here and learn how to apply your glaze. I'm going to be showing you how to glaze a mug, a bowl, an interesting kind of shaped thing like a tray, and also a plate, which I have already covered in underglaze. If you want to see me put this on, you can head over to my shorts. I did it there, so that's where you can go. There are a few types of glazing. We've got your dip and pour, or pour and dip, as I do, and we'll be showing you today. There's also spraying and there is also painting, and I'm not going to show you spraying or painting today because je suis a pour and dipper. Without further ado, let's begin. I do these like question things on my Instagram to ask what you guys want in terms of like content, and someone was like, hey, can you do a glazing one, because I just got a whole lot of stuff out of the kiln and it looks like someone sneezed all over it. We've all been there, babes, no problem. Welcome to Glazing 101. We're just here to dip, we're just here to pour. We're not here to sneeze on our pieces. Bon appetit. All right, here we are. To get started, what you're gonna need is glaze, obviously. You need some water, just clean water to sponge the bottom of your pieces with, a pouring jug, a scrubbing brush, which is gonna mix your glaze up. You also need a little sponge, and of course you need your bisqueware. My bisqueware has been fired to 950 degrees, so somewhere around 950 to 1000 degrees is perfect. So to begin, you need to mix your glaze really well. Let me see if I can show you the inside of the bucket. Oh, not really. Maybe you can see that the top layer is water, and then sort of below it is a whole kind of thicker layer of glaze. We need to just mix this up because you've got your glaze at the bottom, which is really thick, and then at the top it's literally just water. If you haven't used your glaze in ages, then you may find that it's hard panning, so that means that the glaze is sticking right at the bottom of the bucket and it's really difficult to mix up. If you are having that issue, it's worth kind of like doing your best at mixing and then just passing it through a fine mesh sieve. Okay, it's a nice kind of even consistency. If you put your hand at the bottom of the bucket, you're not going to feel any lumps or anything kind of stuck to the bucket. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start with just a simple cup like this. I always start by giving it a blow to kind of get rid of any dust or kind of any like bits that have collected on the surface. A lot of people wash their bisqueware and I don't bother with that. I find it's just kind of like a waste of time, a bit of a pain in the ass, so I just give it and that generally is enough. If you're having issues with crawling, then maybe you need to think about kind of washing your glaze, but I find that it affects the absorption rate of the bisqueware way too much, so I don't really recommend it. So you're going to get your measuring jug. Fill it up, and then we're going to fill the cup up. Leave it in there for a couple of seconds, and then just tip it out. And then I'm going to grab the cup at the bottom and dunk it in. And the pressure of the air that is trapped inside of the cup as I dunk it in means that no glaze goes inside of the cup, it just covers the outside. Give it a little shake off. Spin it over, and then we've got some finger marks that we're going to cover in. So I like to just dip my finger into the glaze and just dab it on. And we'll place that down and allow it to dry. Move on to the next one. It's important not to touch things with your wet hand, so this hand obviously has got glaze on it, and if I touch this glazed piece with my glazy hands, then I'm just going to pull the glaze off of the surface and onto my hands. So try to only handle dried glazed pieces with dry hands. Okay, let's do something like this, which is a soap dish. I have a foot ring here, and this surface I want to be covered in glaze as well as the inside surface. So I wet my hands with the glaze, pinch it between the rim and the foot ring, and I'm just going to dunk it. So now I'm going to pick it up kind of on the foot ring and just top that little fingerprint up with glaze. I'm going to do a very similar thing with this bowl here. So we've got a foot ring here, but we've got this area inside the foot ring which I want the glaze to be in, as well as the walls and the inside of the pot. So I'm just going to grab it here, and I'm going to dunk the whole thing. Pick it up by the foot ring and top up the finger mark. So this obviously has little drips here, as well as you'll see my fingerprints at the bottom. I don't mind that. I don't mind when there's areas where it's like a little bit thicker with glaze. I think it makes the glaze interesting. But if you don't like it, you can just kind of fettle this away when the glaze is dry. Something like this is obviously a different shape. I don't have enough room in here to dip it, unless I dip it one side, flip it, and dip the other side. Dip it, flip it, and dip it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour the glaze onto the tray, and then I'm going to pour it out. And I'm going to let this rim actually be free of glaze so that it kind of has a nice little bit of contrast. It kind of brings the rim into focus. So I'm going to hold this quite steady and level and just pour the glaze in. I'm not going to fill it up. I'm just going to kind of, I don't know, put a decent amount in, and then I'm going to swirl it around. And then pour it out. Give it a little shake, and because I'm going to be removing some of this glaze later with the sponge, I'm just going to get rid of it now so that I can sort of save the glaze. I'm going to do a similar thing here that I did with this tray, with this bowl. I'm going to fill it up, but I am going to keep the sides raw, so the sides are going to just be the clay. So just going to spin it around. It is slightly easier to do this with a round object rather than something like a tray. So it's got a nice even coating of glaze, and then I'm going to pour that out. And then I'm going to keep it upside down while I glaze it inside of the foot ring. And this is not necessary. Loads of people don't actually glaze the inside of the foot ring at all, but I don't know, I just think it looks nice. It's kind of something I've always done. It's a nice little feature, I think. So that's that. I'm going to leave the outside raw, and then we can sponge it off in a moment. the last thing I'm going to glaze is this cup. This is a pint cup of tea if you are British and you just love a cup of tea. It's no good. I never finish a cup of tea. I always get to like here and there's still just like cold ass tea in it. I don't get it. It's every single drink I drink, I only ever drink like 2/3 of it. Even if I love the drink, I don't know what it is. Right, anyway, same thing as with these two. I'm gonna fill it up. Pour it out. And then pick it up by the bottom and dunk it, but I'm only gonna dunk it up to about where I would drink my tea to. Like 3/4 or 2/3 of the way. Hold it there for a sec. And pull it out. So now I'm done with the white. I'm gonna sponge off the bottoms of them and put them on the shelves behind me, ready to be loaded into the kiln. When you are handling freshly glazed ware, it's really important that your hands are nice and dry, otherwise they're going to pull the glaze off the surface. So the way that I kind of work here is I try and have one wet hand and one dry hand, and that means that I can touch the glaze without it coming off onto my fingers, but I also obviously need to dip my sponge in the water quite often. So just give it a dunk. Hold it quite firmly and then sponge the bottoms. So it's important when you're handling glazed pieces that you don't kind of brush your hand across the rim. Because that's sort of like a fragile area of glaze, I suppose. You should use your hand like a little pincer and hold it quite firmly on the walls of the pot, and try not to sort of like brush your hands over it, otherwise you sort of end up brushing the glaze off. If you have areas like this where you accidentally just kind of sponge a little bit too much off the area where you want the glaze to be on, then you can just dip your finger in the glaze, and just as I did with my fingerprints, just top it up like that. And you may be able to see it on the finished piece, but I think it's just fine. It's the nature of a handmade product. So now when we sponge off something like this, we're just going to follow the sharpness of the rim and try not to get any water from the sponge on the inside of the tray. Flip it over, and I'm going to hold it with sort of like a nice flat hand rather than holding it on the glaze if I can avoid it. And then I'll just do the other side. You can see bisque ware is pretty amazing, like it just absorbs that water so quickly. That's why I avoid washing my bisque ware. And bisque ware is essentially like a sponge. Like if you put some water in it, even though it's kind of absorbed into it, there's only so much more water you can add to it. And because glaze is water-based, you need to have the most absorption kind of apply to the glaze rather than already have the piece sodden with water already. Similar principle with the bowl here. I'm gonna wipe off the rim. And then I will wipe the glaze off the sides as well, and of course the foot ring. Anywhere where the glaze touches the kiln shelf, for example the bottom of the foot ring here, when the glaze melts it will turn into glass and it will adhere itself to the kiln shelf. So you have to make sure anywhere that sits on the kiln shelf is very clear of glaze. So for my glazes, I know that this glaze doesn't have a tendency to run, so I am pretty safe having it on the inside of a foot ring like this without the risk of it attaching itself. But if you have quite runny glazes, then you may want to bring the glaze line up a little bit more. So this piece again, I'm going to just pinch it. So now I'm going to fettle this piece. It's dried for a little bit longer, and what fettling really is just kind of like smoothing it. So I just use pads of my fingers, make sure they're really, really dry, and you just very gently kind of brush them over these little bubbly spots. And the items with the little fingerprints, you can do the same thing. My goal with fettling isn't to completely erase anything like a fingerprint, because honestly I kind of like it. I think it makes it personal, you know, it shows that somebody made this thing rather than it's just been, you know, like bought from a random shop or whatever. Really my goal is to kind of just get rid of any bubbles which may turn into little pinholes when the piece has been fired and the glaze has melted. Okay, that is the white glaze done. I'm just going to quickly do my clear glaze as well, which includes the wider plate that I was talking about earlier. So I'm just going to get set up for that, get all my bisque pieces ready, and then I will show you specifically the plate. As you can see, this plate is too big for the bucket, so I have this kind of garish pink wider bowl which I glaze things like plates in. Even like wider bowls like this I would glaze in here because it will not fit in the bucket. So what I do is I stir it up, or if you need to sieve it then you should put it through the sieve. And then these two I have already decorated them, so this is an underglaze, this is a ceramic pencil. So there's kind of two ways that you can do this. So for the first one I will show you kind of way one, and then the second one, this one here, I will show you the way two. Way one, what we're going to do is fill the measuring cup up with the glaze. And just like the bowls that we did earlier, we're going to fill this up. We're going to round it around and then tip it out. I fill this container up and I'm going to dip it. So I'm going to flip the plate over and I'm going to hold it here. You kind of want to hold it in as little places as possible, but for me, I can kind of balance it like this, and every other way I can't. I'm going to now dunk it, and I'm going to try to just go to this line as close as possible. That's it, easy as that. Give it a little shake, flip it over, and then I'm going to top up these finger marks as I did with like the soap dish. And the benefit of doing it this way is, one, you don't have loads of glaze here that you're going to waste, but two, it's, I think, just quite easy, quite efficient to do it this way. The second way that you can do, and it works especially well if you had a foot ring on your piece, which this one doesn't, so it's going to look kind of like a waste of glaze. If you imagine that this was a plate that was too wide for the bucket, you could, and it has a foot ring, you would hold it like this and you would dunk it in with kind of smooth like that. This one doesn't have a foot ring, so I'm going to kind of show you the way that I would do it, pretending it does have a foot ring. Quite cool. So I'm going to just top up these marks again as I did the other one. Okay, now these pieces have dried a little bit and I have had a little tidy up. We are going to clean them up. So we have the first piece, which you can't see the cool grid anymore because the glaze is covering it. We're just going to give it a quick fettle on these drippy areas and fingerprint areas. So with plates, you want to be very careful with them. You don't want to kind of like rub the glaze off, especially if you have some kind of surface decoration. I'm going to use a wide flat hand, flip it over like this, and then grab my sponge and anchor it onto my body very carefully. You don't want to like rub it on your clothes or your apron or anything. I'm just kind of like holding it there in place. There's no glaze on the base of the plate at all. So that one is done. Then we have this next piece, which I dunked the whole thing. So obviously we have a whole lot of glaze on the base of the piece. For me, I don't like waste, so I'm going to try and keep lots of this glaze. I use a metal rib and I just scrape this glaze off and just let it go straight back into the glaze bucket. Obviously, if you are using more than one glaze, if you are overlapping, then you shouldn't do this. Also, if you have glazed this piece maybe yesterday or the day before, you should be very careful when you're doing this because you don't want the glaze to become airborne. This glaze is still quite waterlogged, so it's not really becoming a powder again, it's just kind of flaking off and there's still quite a lot of moisture in it, so it is just sinking straight down into the bucket. But if you did it a while ago, it may become airborne and you should be wearing a mask and have like the window open, or if your studio has ventilation, then make sure that it's on. So now that loads of that glaze is removed, I can repeat that process and just sponge it off. You do want to be nice and thorough with the bottom of something that has been completely dunked, because again, anything that sits on the kiln shelf and it has glaze on it, it will adhere to it. Get big guns involved. Okay, that's done. Because this piece has quite a lot of decoration on it, I don't want to like fettle it too much, but if there's any like big kind of lumps in it, I am going to very carefully kind of remove those. And then the finger marks again. So I will reload the kiln, fire all these pieces, and then I'll come back to you soon when they're finished and we can see the results. Okay, we're back with the results. Full disclaimer, can't actually remember what I showed you on camera that I glazed, but I'm pretty sure this was almost everything. So I'm gonna give you some close-ups of each thing. First of all, this one is my favorite. It's very hard to show you the blue in this light, but I love it so much that I am taking it home with me. We've got the pipe cup, which I think looks great. This is the foot ring that I glazed on the inside, which I think looks really nice. This is it. So it's just kind of sat on the surface. This is the plate with the ceramic pencil, which I think turned out really nicely. This is a little tray. A little soap dish. So that's the inside of it. You can see, so I leave the foot ring unglazed, and then this part here and the little channel for the water to drain is fully glazed. And then this is this side, obviously. And lastly, the cup. Thank you very much for joining me for Glazing 101. Let me know in the comments what you would like to know next, if there's any other questions about glazing. Why is there a helicopter? Let me know in the comments if there's other specific pottery things that you would like to learn about, and I will do my best to teach you the basics of how to make stuff. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye.